Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Rebel News presentation of the 2024 U.S. Vice Presidential Debate. Thank you for tuning into our live stream. I'm David Menzies, coming to you from Rebel News headquarters here in Toronto. And my beloved colleague is Sheila Gunn-Reid, somewhere in the hinterland of Northern Alberta. How you doing tonight, Sheila?
I'm doing great. I swapped the digital background and now my lighting seems all weird. I seem like I was outside getting a sunburn, but I definitely did not today. I'm kind of excited about this debate because there are a lot of things that happening right now that I don't think either vice presidential candidate could possibly have prepared for. I know Tim Walz, according to all accounts, was in some sort of debate boot camp for the last few days. I'm not sure if J.D. Vance needed a debate boot camp, but a lot of things are happening, not just in America, but in the world, that I think maybe might catch Tim Walz flat-footed.
Well, Sheila, Mr. Walz is very familiar with boot camps. Not so much going overseas to actually fight, mind you.
Yeah, no.
I mean, usually stolen valor is kind of a front page issue, especially in the United States of America. But it's amazing how the mainstream media has given this guy a pass on that. and also the lie for not serving, that he wanted to run for office and to be an active member of the military. That's not allowed. And no, that's not true. That is allowed. And I mean, it's astonishing if the roles were reversed, if that was J.D. Vance caught lying and caught fudging the truth, especially about being a veteran fighting overseas. I can only imagine the kind of media coverage, Sheila.
It's fascinating the things that the Democrats can get away with when they have the entire media captured. I mean, you can be a Republican presidential nominee and have 3 attempts on your life, one of them just missing by millimeters.
Yep.
And it is out of the news cycle within days because the media is so captured by the Democrat Party and vice versa that not only will they gloss over Republican achievements, but they will just, as you rightly point out, just avoid even talking about the idea of Tim Walz' stolen valor.
And you know what's funny, Sheila? I dusted off my copy of Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. It goes back some 8 years ago. Well, quite frankly, Sheila, when J.D. Vance was a never Trumper. And wow, how the tide has turned. And you know, the very first, I would say 10 pages of the book are snippets of glowing reviews from the mainstream media. On the back cover, we have, here's one quote, a detailed and moving account of American struggle, Joshua Rothman, the New Yorker. And how about this one quote, an affectionate yet unflinching look at growing up in social and domestic chaos in southwestern Ohio. Vance is a fiercely astute social critic of the sort we desperately need right now, end quote. And that's from the New York Times. The point I'm trying to make, Sheila, if Hillbilly Elegy just came out a few months ago, what do you want to bet these aren't the reviews the New Yorker and the New York Times and the Atlantic are giving it? It's a hypothetical question. We'll never know, unless, of course, there's a Hillbilly Elegy sequel that comes out. Oh, and then all the glowing reviews will turn to a firestorm, methinks.
Yeah, you know, I have more things to say about J.D. Vance because there's a big Canadian tie in the middle of all of this that the CBC pointed out earlier, making it very difficult for them to paint him with the same, like, oh, oopsie doodle, white supremacist brush that they do with so many conservatives. But I should tell everybody what we're doing here. Of course, we are watching the vice presidential debate with you and together, myself and my friend David Menzies. But we are also taking some guests onto the show tonight. So we'll have a few people pop in to talk to us. We're going to watch the debate together. Then we'll react to what we've seen afterwards. And if you want to support what we're doing here at Rebel News, and if you are watching us on YouTube, because I know some of you are, and thank you for being a prickly thorn in YouTube's side by sticking it out over there. But if you want to support us and have an opportunity to have your say, migrate yourself on over to Rumble. It's a great free speech platform. They don't care what you think. They want to give you the opportunity to think and have your say and support the creators that you want to, not the creators that the government has elevated, particularly here in Canada, where Justin Trudeau elevates certain news platforms over others based on their preferential coverage of him. So if you're watching us on Rumble, thank you for that. And I know Rumble thanks you for that. You can do something called the Rumble Rant over there. That's their paid chat. It helps keep the lights on here at Rebel News because we'll never take a penny from Justin Trudeau or any government to do the work that we do. So Rumble Rant, if your Rumble Rant is over $5 US, I'm hereby obligating myself and my friend David Menzies to read it on air and respond to your rant. But don't let that be the bar for entry because, of course, every little bit helps us here at Rebel News. But your chats that are under that $5 US minimum are frequently read on air, and we often read the free chats too because you people are very insightful, and sometimes I think everybody should hear what you have to say. So sometimes we pull the free chats and read them on air too. So if you're watching us over on YouTube, head on over to Rumble. do what's right, support a platform that supports you and supports us. So that's what we're doing. Now, I mentioned the Canadian connection in all of this because I realize there are a lot of Americans watching. There are a lot of Canadians watching. As an Albertan, Canada's Texas, what happens in the United States is very important to me because we keep trying to build a pipeline to you people. And the Democrats keep canceling it even after Trump okays it. So, being our largest buyer of our oil and gas and being the oil and gas producing province, it's very important to us and our economy what happens in the United States. And I'm really sick and tired of having green tyrannists occupying the White House when all we want to do is help you secure your energy future with some friendly Canadian oil. So that's my interest in all of this. But J.D. Vance, reports say his best friend is a brand newly elected Conservative MP. He's in his first sitting of the House of Commons, Jamil Javani. He was J.D. Vance, of course, Ohio Senator. Jamil Javani, they went to school together. I think they were even roommates, just fast friends, the two of them. And as you can tell by Jamil Javani's last name, that's a pretty ethnic sounding last name is what I'm saying. And it's going to be very difficult for the Democrats who break everything down by race to paint Jamil Javani's best friend as some sort of white supremacist hiding under the covers. There's that fun Canadian connection too. So I'm sure the Canadian news will make some sort of big deal out of that again tonight.
And, and it's not just Jamil Javani, Sheila. J.D. Vance's wife is Indian. And
right.
I mean, normally this shouldn't matter a whit. I mean, I don't care if your skin is purple. I judge you by your character. I judge you by your policies. And, but that is not the way things go, especially through the lens of the mainstream media, I should think. And, Sheila, it's interesting. I don't remember being so excited to watch a vice presidential debate. In fact, I think I can count the number of VP debates on one hand that I've watched through the years. I think of the I can't remember the cast member's name, but it was back in the 80s, a Saturday Night Live actor. He was doing a spot-on impersonation of Bob Dole, whose aspiration was to become the Republican nominee for president, and going out of his way to say, not vice president. I don't want to spend 4 years of my life going to state funerals. Okay.
Yeah.
But I don't know about you, Sheila. I'm getting a different vibe about this. And I think maybe it's just because of those handful of swing states where all the polling shows it at a photo finish in terms of the horse race between Republicans and Democrats. And maybe this was a master move by Trump, picking somebody whose roots are in Ohio, who probably represents the feeling of so many people in what was once the Steel Belt, now more commonly referred to as the Rust Belt. And maybe if we get a stellar performance by J.D. Vance, maybe that moves the needle ever so slightly. But you know what? When we're talking about a candidate, whether it's Harris or Trump, ahead by 1 or 2 points, that's basically the statistical rounding error. It's like a dead heat. So I think there is added importance to this vice presidential debate versus ones in previous decades.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking back at this CBC article about the relationship between Vance and Javani, and I know it pained CBC to write every single word of this. It says Vance, and you are right, because this points out the fact that Vance was an outsider. He was a never Trumper. Like so many people, they came around to Trump, myself included. I wasn't even convinced that Trump was a conservative. I still remain unconvinced that he's a conservative. Has he governed as a conservative? Yes. So this is what CBC wrote. Vance, a self-described hillbilly who grew up in a white working-class Ohio family with roots in neighboring Kentucky's coal country, and Giovanni, the black son of a single mother from a Toronto suburb, were classmates at Yale Law School. It was there that the two became, according to Giovanni, best friends. This is what Giovanni wrote. We attended a wine and cheese reception. I didn't know so many different kinds of cheese existed, and I had never tasted wine before. Needless to say, I felt out of place. Across the room stood a fellow student who seemed equally unfamiliar with wine and cheese. Giovanni wrote of Vance in November 2020. We went on to develop a strong friendship, forged through moments of shared discomfort over the course of our 3 years in the Ivy League. And Giovanni performed the Bible reading at Vance's wedding. So very, very close Canadian ties.
You know, Sheila, forgive me. I got a little distracted because it just shows you how woke CBC is. I was actually reading the copy along with you. It's very odd, isn't it, that white is lowercase, as you can see, grew up in a white working class Ohio family,
Yeah, right.
and black is uppercase. I mean, isn't this kind of odd? If we're all about equality, shouldn't we go all lowercase or all uppercase, whatever the descriptor is for that race? You know, there's some kind of, there used to be, I think it might still be online, but it was this uber left-wing progressive free newspaper called Now Magazine. And they once wrote an article and it was about a page and a half long of torture. And it was why they're going uppercase B for black and lowercase W for white.
I read the same article. I was like, it was a real self-flagellation of a day for me. I was like, why am I even reading this? But you have to understand how the other side thinks.
Yes.
To know that you are right. It's why sometimes I listen to CBC radio. I listen to As It Happens to remind myself that ever giving those people money is a bad idea.
But that's the thing, Sheila. After reading it verbatim, I still didn't understand the point she was trying to make. But anyways, it's
they don't know
I'm being
either.
a nitpicker here. But
I was just going to go back to your point about Vance being, I think, a really good balance for Trump, because I think in Trump's first time around, he picked a vice presidential candidate who was Christian and a real stickler on everything, just like a moral beacon of virtue, right? Because that was Trump's biggest criticism leveled at him from a lot of the Christian right, was Trump has some moral issues floating around in his background. And so he picked a vice presidential candidate, a running mate who would balance out those issues for him. This time around, Trump is, to combat the idea of he's a billionaire. What does he know about the struggling people in the middle class? Except he's the most blue collar billionaire I've ever seen in my entire life.
That's a great descriptor.
But he's picked this person who grew up in addiction and poverty and fatherlessness to balance out those criticisms of him being out of touch. How could he possibly care about these issues that are facing middle America and Appalachia? How could he understand? Well, he picked a running mate who does. So I think he's really good at picking those kind of people. I know we've got an ad break, or at least an ad message, and then we will bring in our friend Avi Yamini from Down Under, who's not with us for the entire show today. Just a quick little pop-in message, because he's working on another very important story we don't want to take him off of. But I've got a quick message here, and then we'll get to Avi. So Be Naked is the sponsor here. In today's society, it's tough to be a man in a world dominated by overly masculine liberal women. Oh, that was, I was like, am I reading that right? And then they finished up with women, and I was like, I am reading it right. It's just not how it's meant to be. Everywhere we look, it's gender neutral, this product, or made for her, that product. It's why we started a company that embodies the ethos of men's lives matter too. With products that aren't designed to be gender neutral or used by people with pronouns, our products at Rumble are designed and built for men by men, period. If you struggle with low energy, mood swings, hair loss, or if you need to perform better at the gym or maybe in bed and recover quicker after, throw out all your other garbage supplements and try animal organs. They're traditionally the most nutrient-rich supplements on the planet, but our bison organs are a step above. The grass-fed, non-vaccinated bison are a species where the weak are allowed to die and only the strongest survive, and they can turn anything into valuable food. They're foragers. You don't have to give them hay. Anyway, that's just a farmer content in there. Here's our commitment to you. From men who have real confidence in their products, try this today, and if you don't like it, fine. Return it for a refund. Go to benaked.com code studio and get 15% off today. So that's benaked.com code studio. Get 15% off today. And by using that code, you tell them that we sent you and we like that. Let's bring in our friend Avi from Down Under. It is night here, but early there, or mid-morning there for Avi. Avi, how's it going? How are you doing? War is popping off in the Middle East, and I'm sure that's of great interest to you. And I think it's going to be a big topic of debate here at the vice presidential debate.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, Sheila, it's about 10 a.m. There's a lot happening today on the eve of the Jewish New Year. I get the sense that next year is going to be a wild ride, and we're going to head straight into that new year. It's going to pop off into the new year. But like I said, what's going on in unfolding right now as we speak in the Middle East, I think is going to be a big topic of this debate. And I can't see how Kamala's going to walk out of that one unscathed. You know, the Biden-Harris administration have been the administration of war in the last 4 years. Trump has an amazing record during his period. There was no new wars. He was the man of peace, no matter how divisive they tried to paint him. So, and I think J.D. Vance has really strong stances on this issue, and especially Israel. So I'm expecting him to play the truth, and the truth is only going to hurt Harris.
And you know, Avi, and by the way, thanks for joining us. I know on the presidential debate, you were there for the whole duration, but now you're just popping in and you're going to pop out again, kind of like a little Joey in a mother kangaroo's pouch, but that's okay. We'll take a little bit of Avi Yamini instead of nothing of Avi Yamini. But Avi, more, to the point that you were making in terms of war, and this lays squarely on the Harris-Biden administration, is the fact that when Donald Trump was in office, the U.S. had its foot on the neck of the mullahs in Iran. They were virtually bankrupt. And when the Biden-Harris administration came in, the sanctions on the oil were no longer enforced, and you had tens and tens and tens of billions of dollars coming into a near bankrupt regime in terms of selling oil, most of it to China. And where did the proceeds of that go? Well, we know where it went, don't we? It went to Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. And as of the last 24 hours, I guess Iran is getting tired of the proxy war, and they're just going all-out war themselves, firing missiles into Israel. I think if you're J.D. Vance, this is a open wound, right? And by the way, I should also add that compared to Ukraine, where there's an express train of money and arms going to Ukraine to defend itself against Russia, it's a very much of a slow walk in getting arms to Israel. And they're going to need to replenish their defenses. I mean, the Iron Dome is working overtime right now. And how long is it going to be before they are out of those self-defense missiles? So I guess what I'm saying, Avi, is that contrary to popular belief, the idea that a Republican like Donald Trump was a hawk, that's completely contrary to the truth. The world was such a safe place in the Middle East, as Sheila likes to say, thanks to the Abraham Accords, peace was breaking out all over. And now look where we are. I mean, I don't know if it's an exaggeration or not. Some are saying this is the precursor perhaps to World War III, God forbid. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've learned to ignore those people that every single move is the precursor to World War III. They're like climate alarmists. Like, yes, Iran's finally fired 180 ballistic missiles that killed 2 Palestinians and a couple of Iranians as well. I think they got tired of in the last couple of weeks of losing so much. But what more to your point of what during the Trump administration, not only did he suck them dry of cash, they were also scared of his response to any kind of misbehavior. And the same can be said for Russia and Ukraine. There's a reason why Putin waited till after the Trump administration. It's the financial side is one side, but also having a leader who strikes fear into our enemy, and our enemy, the enemy of the West, is as important. And I see Iran. Iran understands the weakness of the United States. They do fear the strength of Israel, and they're smart to fear it. I think they were playing they're trying to play their cards. On one hand, they've copped, and I can understand they've copped a lot of criticism from the Islamic world over not responding to the fact that Israel killed the leader of Hamas at their most important event in their capital. And then Israel went on to, and there was no real response from Iran. It was like a bit of a theater, a week or two later. I can't really remember, but it was all a big theater. We're going to fire some missiles. And the entire Arab world condemned that. Then after that, we saw how Israel targeted 3,000 Hezbollah proxy fighters via their pages, and the next day, thousands more via the walkie-talkies, and then killing the leader of Hezbollah. And Iran was just not doing anything. They were promising, it was all hot air. They'd been promising for a year to step up and do something and not just rely on these, caveman proxies. And so they had to do something. And this is what they've done. Now, if Trump was in office, there's no chance they would even do this, because they would fear Trump's reaction, which would be, I imagine. Look, I don't blame him. If I was Iran, I would fear Trump's reaction as well, because I imagine it would be quick, and it would be brutal. And at the end of the day, all the criticisms that are leveled at Israel they just don't land as harshly on America for some reason. When America does it, when America responds, a lot more people seem to be okay with it, or at least I guess America's not an easy little target where you can just mass bully. And yeah, so I dare say J.D. Vance he was walking in today, especially with what's playing out on the ground as the debate happens. He should be armed and ready to fire.
Well, I hope so, and I'm looking forward to it. And he is a veteran, unlike, Tim Walz claims he's a veteran, but as we said before he got on, he's a veteran of boot camps, not actually going over to foreign soil. But, with all things Middle East, it's complicated, don't you think, Avi? Because when you look at the murderous mullahs in Iran, they have a three-pronged charter, if you will. And this isn't my interpretation. This is what they've said. Number one, they see their goal as being to cleanse Islam, which means to go after the Sunni Muslims. They are Shiite Muslims. Number two, of course, the Jewish state has to be eradicated. And number three, we're coming for the great Satan, the USA. So they have an incredible affinity for making a lot of diverse, powerful enemies. And that Saudi Arabia, if the closer Iran gets to a nuclear weapon, do you think Saudi Arabia is going to do nothing? I mean, they like to see themselves as the straw that stirs the drink, so to speak, in the Middle East. They're going to want to get nuclear too. And that's where I see the dominoes happening for World War III. Yeah, I mean, it could be an exaggeration, but
I don't think that's an exaggeration. I think a nuclear Iran is the recipe for a world war. And I guess any Islamist entity that has nuclear weapons is the recipe for a world war, just because unlike other countries, they possess a special ideology which encourages to become a martyr, and you go straight to what they call heaven with your 72 version. So it's an ideology that encourages sacrificing myself and my people and everything to kill the enemy. That is the danger. I think Saudi Arabia, I think a lot of the timing had to do with the fact that Saudi Arabia was coming very close to normalizing relationships with Israel, a bit like United Arab Emirates. I think secretly, and maybe less so secretly, often publicly or semi-publicly these days, they are supporting Israel. In fact, I believe during the original Iran attack that we were discussing before, that was all theater in response to the killing in Iran. Saudi Arabia helped Israel to shoot down, or at least open the airspace to shoot down some of those missiles. Saudi Arabia is very much in this, and like you say, yes, Iran is a Shia supremacist Islamic country. It's, for people who don't know the makeup, Sunnis make up, I believe, about 85% of Muslims. Shia make up 15%. The Shia is mostly led by Iran, and then you have the proxies like Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has caused havoc. That's why you see even in the Arab world, when Hezbollah leader Nasrallah was killed by Israel, much of the Arab world was celebrating, because, as you say, there's one part of the war where they're all united, and that's against the Jew. Yep. But once you get rid of the Jew, and anybody who thinks for a second that the Middle East is going to become some sort of peaceful paradise when you get rid of the Jews, well, you don't understand the first thing about Islam and those different sects. And that's just starting. There's a million sects below that. But Hezbollah killed a lot of Sunnis, and Iran will absolutely want to take down Saudi Arabia, which is considered like the leader of the Sunni world. Right now, I'd say the world is a better place if Israel ensures that we stop the threat of Iran. And I'm not saying like the threat is if Iran manages to get a hold of those weapons. And I believe strongly in the Israeli intelligence to ensure that doesn't happen.
Avi, dude, no, I got to cut everybody off. Don't take this the wrong way. You just talked about getting rid of the Jew, and unfortunately we do have to do that on this panel right now because we have to take an ad break.
I hope those Iranian checks are worth it, Sheila.
They are dollar bills, y'all. No, you gotta beat it. You got things to do, and we've got to hit an ad break, and we have another guest coming in. So Avi, thank you so much for your insight. I will.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Bye.
Good night, Avi.
It's the news event of the year. Canada's most controversial premier sits down with Canada's most controversial journalist, and everything is on the table. Come watch Ezra Levant one-on-one with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith in front of a live studio audience in Calgary. Nothing's off limits. Nothing's held back. Questions that would make Justin Trudeau invoke martial law. Answers that will make Stephen Guilbeault pee his pants. You're not going to want to miss this one. But you have to be there in person at the Rebel News Live mega conference in Calgary on October the 5th. Tickets are limited, so drop everything and go to rebelnewslive.com right now. Special discounted prices for Patriots and special extra high prices if you're with the CBC. Go to rebelnewslive.com now.
I'm in Brazil, so I'm using a VPN to get on the internet. What's a VPN? It stands for a virtual private network, and you get around these government firewalls. Suddenly, the president of Brazil banned his whole country from going on Twitter. It was a political censorship news. I've downloaded the VPN from a company called PIA VPN. We've teamed up with them at Rebel, and it's a great deal. I got on the internet really quickly, safely, and even I'm a bit of a technophobe. I managed to figure it out with 2 clicks. And here's the great news. If you go to piavpn.com/rebel news, not only do you get a big discount, but they pay us a bit of a commission too. Everyone's a winner. Your freedom, your VPN, and a little bit of cash coming to support Rebel News. I'm using it myself to get around the censors in Brazil. You can use it too. That's piavpn.com/rebel news.
Right now, I'm standing in front of a massive 47-foot long billboard alongside of Alberta's busiest highway, Highway 2. This thing gets 1.3 million monthly impressions every single month, and it's spreading the word far and wide about the new Rebel News cruise. So if you're thinking about joining us in June 2025 to Alaska, act now because it's going to fill up fast. We're sailing on the Holland America cruise line, which means you can expect top-notch service and luxury while you're on board. But the real excitement, the special Rebel News only events. So what are you waiting for? Head over to rebelnewscruise.com, check out the cabins, see the details, and grab your spot before they're gone. I can't wait to see you there so that we can spend an unforgettable week with some of the best people on the planet, Rebel News supporters. Let's make 2025 the year we come together, have an amazing time, and keep fighting for truth and for freedom. See you on the Rebel News Cruise. Go to rebelnewscruise.com today for cabins and details. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid.
Here is my kind of passport, folks. Look at this beauty. Introducing a new special edition Freedom Passport. What if the greatest teacher of all time framed his message as a constitution for a kingdom of love, faith, and freedom? Inspired by Jesus' teachings in the Sermon on the Mount, this special edition Freedom Passport captures the foundational truths of love and freedom for all. It's a powerful reminder of Jesus' call to love one another that you can carry with you every day. Join the movement, share the truth, and spread the love with your family and friends. Get your Freedom Passport today at freedompassport.ca. That's freedompassport.ca. All orders in North America come with free shipping and a complimentary song with each purchase.
Why should you join Canada's National Firearms Association? We currently have one of the most aggressively anti-firearm governments in our nation's history, promoting fear and placing blame like never before. Our rights, freedoms, culture, and heritage, it's all on the line. But we are fighting back, and there is strength in numbers. We work within the law to change the law, to defend competitors, hunters, collectors, and other law-abiding firearms owners. We can get through this. We've done it before, and we'll do it again, if you are with us. Canada's National Firearms Association. Freedom, safety, responsibility.
Hello everyone! Hello all Rebel fans! Rebel News Live is back and will be soon happening in Calgary. Are you coming? Because I'm going to be there and I would love to see all of you and meet new faces. This year, we are heading to Calgary on October 5th for a fun full day of interesting conversations and of course, great food too. It's my favorite event of the year and I know you won't want to miss it. You will be able to meet and hear from your favorite Rebel journalists and many special guests. And today, we have the honor to feature Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. You can get your ticket and see all the details at rebelnewslive.com. So, see you in Calgary. Love you all.
Well, folks, we have temporarily lost Sheila Gunn Reid due to our arch nemesis technical difficulties, but I am more than pleased to say that in her place, I'm going to introduce to you the senior editor at large for Breitbart News, and that would be Joel Pollack. Joel, how you doing this evening, my friend?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Well, I got to tell you, talk about an October surprise. I think the U.S. economy has been battered by maybe three pandemics, if you will, COVID-19, then Biden economics, And now a longshoreman strike, which could be costing the economy $5 billion plus a day. I'm wondering, given that the chatter about this strike kicking off is happening right now in real time, will that have any effect on the upcoming debate, my friend?
I don't think so. I don't think people have really paid much attention to it yet because it hasn't shown up in prices or empty shelves, that sort of thing. You know, the union is taking advantage of the maximum leverage it has right before an election to sit down and conduct this strike. So I think people expect it'll be resolved because there is an interest in resolving it so it doesn't hurt the Democratic presidential ticket. But what is interesting to me is that nobody in Biden's cabinet seems to be aware of what they could do about it. Pete Buttigieg, who was absent during the cargo crisis 3 years ago, is quiet again. Gina Raimondo, the Commerce Secretary, who's widely thought of as the most qualified member of the cabinet, also really isn't involved, even though it's going to have a massive impact potentially on commerce. The Secretary of Labor could be involved, but there's just nobody's home. Nobody's really running anything.
Yeah.
And I think Americans know that already. So I'm not sure the strike is going to have much of an impact just yet. It could toward the end of the month, but I don't know if it'll even go on that long. So I'm sure it'll come up at the vice presidential debate, but I don't think it's yet a major issue for Americans.
And that's what I think Americans would be looking at, Joel, what you alluded to earlier. Literally going into a Walmart, say, and the shelves are empty. And when the shelves are eventually restocked, the price points going up. I think the two sides are a long way apart on wages. I understand longshoremen can make 150,000 US plus benefits. So it just seems like a real shot to the solar plexus. And you're probably right. This is when they think they have more leverage, when we're less than 40 days away from a federal election. Now, Joel, I was saying to Sheila Gunn-Reid earlier, I think I might be able to count on just one hand how many U.S. vice presidential debates I've watched, but this one feels different. This one feels a little extra special, I think, and I want to get your opinion, just because of how close things are in those 7 swing states. And the fact that if either candidate comes out with a grand slam home run, just swaying some people a little bit might be good in the big picture to flip a county, flip a state, what have you. What say you, my friend?
That's certainly possible, but I don't think this is quite as interesting as some of the previous debates have been. Probably the most highly watched vice presidential debate of all time was Sarah Palin versus Joe Biden. And she got the better of him in that debate. It didn't affect the final result as Obama and Biden went on to win the election. I don't think this debate is going to have much of an impact. It is going to be interesting, especially because we have seen so little of Tim Walz in the media. The Harris campaign is hiding him. They're not letting him do interviews. When he does interviews, they're terrible. And he has a very positive impression publicly because the media show no interest at all in his record or in challenging him on the issues. So it'll be interesting because we're going to see him maybe for one of the first times, actually, since he was declared the running mate. And that's why I think this debate can only hurt Kamala Harris, because I don't think he is very likable. I don't care what the polls say about his approval rating. People don't know him. And watching him on stage for 90 minutes is not going to improve their impression of him. He makes silly gestures. He's very obtrusive, unpleasant, and he is very much like Joe Biden, who would try to bully his opponents on the debate stage, except Joe Biden, I think, had a more convincing demeanor. And I think Tim Walz is just really just unappealing. So I think this is actually going to hurt Harris, but probably not that much. There is, of course, the possibility that either one of these two candidates could commit some major gaffe that ends up being a news cycle for a few days. But I don't think either of them is really as important as the top two candidates are. I mean, it really is a Trump versus Harris election. And even though Trump's getting on in years, no one's really asking the question about what happens if J.D. Vance has to take over. That was relevant for Joe Biden because he was already showing signs of aging. in 2020. With Tim Walz, I don't think anybody expects him to step into the role as president. I don't think he's even being measured by that yardstick. And I think he can only hurt Harris. J.D. Vance is going to have some problems too. I don't know if you want me to get into what I think they're going to ask each other, but I basically see this event as interesting, mostly because we haven't seen Walz on the campaign trail, but probably not a big factor. And that's, again, because vice presidential debates don't usually matter that much, but also because I think most voters in this race have already made up their minds. And because we live in two media universes where the Democrats tell Democrats that their candidate won, the Republicans tell Republicans that their candidate won, and people generally believe it on either side. So there aren't going to be any real collapses. I mean, the exception was the Trump-Biden debate earlier this year, but that's because Biden simply performed so poorly and Trump so well in contrast that I think even Democrats knew their man was done.
How about this for a question, Joel? What if instead of you being a journalist, you are a political advisor? You were an advisor to Tim Walz and then an advisor to J.D. Vance. What strategy would you give each candidate coming into this debate tonight?
I tell Walz to tone it down. You know, he had some congressional debates. If you go back and look at how he debated when he ran for Congress in 2006, where he came across almost deadpan in his presentation, I think that version of Tim Walz is more convincing to a national audience than the one we've seen on rally stages and at the Democratic convention, where he gesticulates wildly. He opens his mouth very widely. It's just a weird set of gestures. It's very off-putting. I think female voters who are generally committed to Harris don't really like him, don't warm to him. And I think he should just tone it down. I'd say control your body language. Don't try to be Joe Biden. Just be Tim Walz and be a high school teacher, be a military reservist as you were for 24 years, be deadpan. For J.D. Vance, I would say that he has to come across as more empathetic because although he's been an outstanding senator and he has an amazing command of the issues, I think he's actually improved over the course of the campaign. I've been very impressed. I wasn't the biggest fan. I didn't dislike him, but I didn't think he was going to bring anything really special to the ticket, but he has actually done so. He's improved, he's learned, he's very good at dealing with the media. So I don't want to take any of that away from him, but he is haunted by a quote that he made in 2021 before he was a senator, where he took a shot at what he called childless cat ladies. That's not something he said when he was a senator or when he was running for vice president, but what he meant was that many of the people setting policy on issues concerning families and children don't really have children of their own, and therefore maybe they're not as sensitive to the concerns that people have for the future if they have some skin in the game, something at stake, children to worry about. I don't think it was a great point then, and the way he made it wasn't good, and it's really haunted him because I think that female voters felt like he was putting them down. And I think he was actually, although I don't think he thought the stakes were that high because he was just going on Tucker Carlson on Fox and shooting the breeze and beating up on some liberal crazy wokeness. But I think he's got to correct that impression. And, you know, I know how he is in real life. I mean, I don't know him personally, but he has an amazing wife. He has amazing kids, and he's got a very high degree of concern for his constituents. And that comes out in many different ways. I think he has to tap into that. So I would tell him, you need to show your heart in this debate. Not in a kind of sentimental way, but you need to show that you understand people who are different from you, who may have chosen different pathways in life, and that you empathize with their struggles. I think that's the challenge for him. If he can do that, then I think he'll have a very successful debate.
No, those are great points. And yes, the childless cat ladies quote, it keeps coming up. I guess it's true. Cats do have 9 lives. Would you go as far, Joel, again, if you were in the role of an advisor, to just take it back to actually do an apology? I truly believe that the general public is very forgiving if they think you are giving a sincere apology and not one of these bogus apologies if I offended somebody.
You know, I hear your point, and I think it's got some appeal to it. The problem is that in a debate, that's going to be the headline. Vance apologizes for cat lady remark. You don't want to draw attention to it. So you have to kind of move past it and say, look, the real issue here is concern about our children and our future, and then just go into that, and talk about, and then say Tim Walz has a terrible record as governor of Minnesota, because even though he's a teacher, and I commend him for it, schools in Minnesota are doing worse today than they were when he came into office. And that's an indictment of the way that Democrats run the schools in this country. They run them for the unions and not for the students. And we need to think about our children. And that's the point I was trying to make. That's what I would say. I wouldn't even dwell on the words, but you've got to show that you care about something. It's not about trying to win a battle. It's really about caring for the people. And that's why you might have spoken a little bit too harshly.
And, Joel, I see my colleague Sheila Gunn-Reid is back on. Before I throw it over to Sheila, one last thing. You made excellent points, by the way. On the other hand, as much as childless cat ladies keep coming up, one of the nicknames Walz has is Tampon Tim. How do you get past that?
People don't know that. He's just been a mystery. That's why he has a positive approval rating. But I do expect Vance to bring up the fact that Tim Walz was part of the Democratic Party's cultural push for transgenderism in schools down to the level of little children, and putting tampons in the boys' restroom as if to deny any biological distinction between boys and girls. Now, when you do that, you create chaos, you create confusion. You also give the boys something to abuse and mess around with. I mean, there was an article written by somebody who described what happened in her school when the boys had pads and tampons in their restrooms, and they found everything to do with them, including clogging the toilets and sticking them to the mirrors and stuff like that. I mean, it's just silliness. It's absolutely ridiculous. And that's not even the worst of it when it comes to Tim Walz and transgenderism. Under Tim Walz, Minnesota is a sanctuary state for transgender surgeries for minors. Yep. That means you can go there as a minor and you can have whatever surgery or drugs that you and a doctor decide you should have without the consent of your parents, without them being informed. Nobody can take you away. They can't go to the courts and assert their rights. That's very scary to the vast majority of the American people, even where I sit in California. The transgender agenda, which has been pushed by Democrats through their supermajority in the state legislature, is not popular, even with liberal Californians. So I think that's where I would hit him. It's not just the tampons in the bathrooms, which you can basically ignore, but it's the state-sanctioned abuse of children. I think that's an issue.
Great points, Joel. Sheila?
You know what? I had technical difficulties, so I didn't get to hear the entirety of your conversation. I'm sure Joel, as always, made some excellent points and educated us all on things that we scarcely understand. I'm just here to thank Joel for coming on the show and to congratulate him on his brand new baby.
Oh yeah. My new baby, Rafael Micha, is his name, and he was a post-October 7th baby.
Wow.
Congratulations, Joel. I had no idea. Sorry.
Yep. No, I pay very close attention to Joel.
He's about 10 days old. He's beautiful. He's very peaceful. He's been great. We had a great labor and delivery, thank God, and he's very healthy. So that's all you can really ask for, right?
It is indeed. Joel, thanks so much for coming on the show. Congratulations on the baby, and we can't wait to see what you do next.
All right. Thanks so much. Enjoy watching the debate.
Joel.
Thank you, Joel. Joel's great, Sheila. And I just want to say, isn't it funny? Joel and you and me and Avi and the big boss man and so many of our viewers were in Israel just a year ago, September 2023. Sheila, to me, it feels like 50 years ago. And you remember that seminar we had? It was somebody, forgive me, I forgot his name, but he was an advisor to Donald Trump when he was the president, about the Abraham Accords. And the issue came up, and this is just a few weeks, folks, before what happened on October 7th. What about the Palestinians? Well, what's the deal there? And he gave the analogy that, the gear shift is neither in drive or reverse. We're not moving forward. We're not moving back, just in neutral. And they've been offered to come on board. They've been offered billions and billions of dollars. It's always no, no, no. So we've moved on, and moving on like to the UAE and making, reaching out to Saudi Arabia. And now, Sheila, just weeks after that analogy, it's a completely different ballgame, isn't it? That seems like the distant past as opposed to 12 months ago.
Yeah, same advisor on the Abraham Accords explained Donald Trump's strategy to peace in the Middle East. And he said, the road to the White House goes through Jerusalem. And he said they have to figure out how to make peace with the Jews before they get access to American markets for whatever they're trying to do, and American power. And it worked. As I always say, peace broke out in the Middle East while Trump was in power, and it quickly fell apart right after that. I'm sorry for the quality of my camera today. I can't figure out what's going on. I've had to restart my camera a couple of times, but I don't know. Well, we'll continue on. We've got a couple of ads to read. We've got some really generous Rumble rants that we'll get to. So we've got a quick message from, let's read the Rumble rant first. Okay. Stefan OGG. G. There's 5 G's anyway. Gives us $200. I'm presuming that's US, so that's like 300 Canadian pesos.
Thank you.
Says, love you guys. Wow, that's so generous. Love you guys and love Rebel News. Thank you. Hopefully Canada gets a federal election ASAP. Take it up with Jagmeet Singh. They won't let us. Canada must go. Pierre Poilievre. Trump, Poilievre, a North American powerhouse. Wouldn't that be lovely? As an Albertan who cares deeply about drill, baby, drill, and then selling that oil to the nice people who want it, wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't it be wonderful? We would deal with our immigration issues together instead of just being the end location of all of Biden's immigration issues. Would be great.
Oh, and Sheila, let's not forget, and I'm sure you remember this, you being in oil country and your family actively involved in the oil patch. What was the first executive order President Joe Biden signed? It was to kill Keystone XL.
And what was the first that Trump signed? To build it.
So there's the two sides of the coin, folks. You want prosperity, you want energy independence, you want a higher standard of living, you want jobs, or do you want the precise opposite of what I just said?
Do you want war in the Middle East, which threatens to spill over to everywhere?
Yeah.
It's very chilling to think that we are on the precipice of a hot war in the Middle East, and Joe Biden is catching flies with his mouth on the beach right now, and Kamala Harris is taking phone calls without her earbuds plugged in on Air Force One or whatever she's doing. We've got another chat. And it's from Long Live Liberty, gives us $5 and says, hey, nice lady. So I'm going to presume that's me, not David. What's important to you, which nobody's talking about in the news, but you think should be looked into? I can tell you, I think it is the pernicious indoctrination of our children in the classroom. It will, if we don't undo it, promise us liberal governments for eternity, and we're headed into a hot war maybe in the Middle East, and we have kids who should be fighting age thinking that they are cats or the wrong gender or whatever. And look, I don't want to send anybody's kids to war. It's why I'm anti-invasion and I'm anti-war. But I don't think there's ever been a generation less ready than this one. However, I did see the other day that perhaps the problems with the current young people are outsized, in that the ones that are getting all the oxygen and airplay, they're actually fewer than we think. They just seem to be protesting all the things because the younger demographic, like 18 to 25, they're the most conservative demographic that will vote in the next election. So for me, I think it's what's going on in the classroom. It's only independent media talking about it. It's not in the mainstream, and it is such a mainstream issue in the world. It's something that it doesn't matter what background you come from, what your religious predilections are. You care about what's being taught to your kids, and you realize that your kids can't do math. They can't read and write. They don't know which is the right there. They have no idea, but they know all about pronouns, and that's a real problem. And I think parents across the board care about it. But the mainstream media says that if you talk about it, you're some sort of anti-trans bigot. So I think that's the one.
And you know, Sheila, to go back to your former point about the 18-25 demographic going very conservative these days, I can tell you my two sons are in that demographic. And I think,
mine too.
There you go. And I think what's driving it, not so much in your neck of the woods, but certainly where I live, the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. It used to be, if you were in that demographic, I guess it was ever thus in the last several decades, home ownership was kind of a dream. But if you went to work and you saved and you scrimped and you paid maybe 25, 30 years, you'd finally slay that mortgage. Sheila, I can tell you right now, with people in that demographic, 18 to 25, a down payment on a house in the GTA is the impossible dream now. And that means you have to leave. By the way, I got to tell you, that's why I'm proud of my sons. They went 5 hours south of GTA to Windsor, because that's part of the solution. If you can't afford, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, then you get out of Dodge and you go elsewhere. And, and this speaks something about this generation. Do you know what, Sheila? The number one reason given in that demographic, why won't you leave your city? You know what it is?
I have no idea.
Because it means I'd be away from my friends.
Oh my goodness. You make new friends. Money will help you make friends.
Well, not only that, Sheila, I mean, when I left Toronto to go to St. Paul, Alberta to start my career in journalism, such as it is, I left everyone behind. It's tough. But I would argue it's much easier today. Everyone's got a phone. There's FaceTime. There's, all kinds of text messaging, whatever. You're never away, as I was when communicating with your friend, because long distance was so expensive. And I'm talking landline long distance.
Yeah, you can make new friends over the hobbies that you can afford by moving to Alberta. My son has become quite the golfer these days, because that's what you do when you make a little bit of scratch in the oil patch, and then you can have time for a hobby and maybe a vacation and a house and a girlfriend and maybe a kid someday and a nice vehicle. And I don't even know how the young people are doing it in other parts of the country. Tell them Alberta is calling and they must answer the phone. That's what I'm saying. We've got a sponsored read here that we must do.
Okay.
Now, this one is only for our U.S. residential friends only, but I know there are many of you watching. Maybe you want to peer into the crystal ball of your future. If Biden and Harris, or Harris and Walz, continue to be in charge of your country. The 2024 U.S. election is upon our doorstep. I think that's why you're all here right now. And Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are knocking on your door. They're pushing for higher taxes for Americans, and even taxes on unrealized gains. Can you imagine that? Paying taxes on something you never took profits on? What would that do to the economy? Will they come for your retirement savings? Will they come for your house? Who knows? But do not wait to find out. Learn how you could protect and diversify everything you've worked for with the top-rated precious metals company, Goldco. Goldco has over 6,000 five-star reviews, a bunch of awards, and has helped thousands of Americans purchase over $2.5 billion, with a B, dollars in gold and silver. Visit rebelnews4gold.com to get your free 20 to 25 gold and silver kit, plus up to a 10% instant match on bonus silver for qualified accounts. Learn how precious metals like gold and silver could help you. Visit rebelnews4gold.com. That's rebelnews4gold.com. And that is, again, unfortunately, only for our United States friends who are watching the show tonight. But Canadians, maybe you should consider diversifying your portfolio these days too. We've got one more message, then we've got to get to the debate. Have you felt the tension in our country? I wonder if you could feel the tension as I struggled with my computer earlier, and I still look like have Vaseline on the lens of my camera for some reason. It's very 1980s soap opera lens happening there. Have you felt the tension in our country? Western civilization is at a crossroads. We're facing threats from the deep state, corrupt politicians, and radical groups. But there's hope. It's time for a leader with wisdom, someone who can guide us through these challenges. Together, we can save America and protect our values. Ready to take action? Visit www.2024 USA.com to learn how you can help. Together, let's make a difference. Okay, I think it's time to watch, isn't it?
Indeed,
Efron,
it
is
is.
it time?
9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Is it ready? I'm interested.
Starting
okay,
up right
let's
now,
watch.
Decides the vice presidential debate.
Good evening. I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for joining us for tonight's CBS News vice presidential debate. We want to welcome our viewers on CBS, on other networks here in the U.S. and around the world. We have a consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance tonight meeting for the first time.
I'm Margaret Brennan. In order to have a thoughtful and civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims made by each other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns. The stage is set. Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the vice president said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me. And she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you. Let's turn now to Hurricane Helene. The storm could become one of the deadliest on record. More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing. Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger, stronger, and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane, because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then of course afterwards to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job. And I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say, Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America, because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane. And my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover. But we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. And I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years.
Senator.
Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing
Senator,
worse by
your
the
time
climate.
is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil, but the folks know, and like I said, again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our number one export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that. And an all above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters. Senator Vance, your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Governor, do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things regarding children?
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history, 30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the attorney general of the largest state and a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this, and that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents, detection for drugs, DOJ money to speed up these the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again, 9 years after he came down that escalator, dehumanizing people and telling them what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as drug mules, and it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary. But the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this. And Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true. Don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Lankford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim,
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this? Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been, and it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed. You have got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us, you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it. And it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn now to the economy. Thank you.
Margaret, the rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora.
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan. So let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by a third. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do, we'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best, more people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer. A lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do, and some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies. And what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%. Open the American southern border and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom, because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say, look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle class and working class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one, whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, or whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years, and the last year as president? That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop. And we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
that's a gross generalization.
that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on healthcare then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now, look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything, many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric, but being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate, Donald Trump, unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out to messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration, the first round, if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now to the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duval, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about healthcare. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in healthcare for a reason. We trust women, we trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Yeah, well, the question got asked and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography? There's a very real chance had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, it was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022, talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things, to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator?
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think,
That's
whether
not
you're
true.
pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things work best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget, Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
Sheila?
Turn your earpiece on. Okay, while David sorts out his technical issues, I do know you can hear me now.
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? It's like a Verizon commercial. We do have a quick message from our friends at Rumble before we move on. So while the world is watching the commercial break, we've got one of our own. We've got a message from our friends at Rumble. And it's one that's incredibly important to both the survival of Rumble, but us here at Rebel News, because as I said off the top of the show, we've been completely demonetized by YouTube. So when Rumble first started in 2013, they built a platform for the small creator. That was us. They didn't censor or have biases. They were fair and they treated all creators equally. No one thought platforms would censor political conversation or censor opinions on COVID, but we know they did. Facebook admitted they felt a pressure from the Biden and Harris administration. However, Rumble did not. They held the line. They're attacked daily for giving us here at Rebel News a voice to talk to you. They're attacked in the corporate media. They're attacked by governments like France. They're attacked from brand advertisers who refuse to work with them. Corporate America is fighting to remove free speech. It's happening at lightning speed here in Canada. Rumble is fighting to keep it. Rumble won't survive with brand advertisers. They don't get much of it. So watching our show on Rumble is the most they can ask from you. But if you really believe in this fight, and if you have the means, one major way you can help Rumble survive is by joining Rumble Premium. Join the community that believes in the First Amendment and believes in our human right to free speech. Rumble's offering $10 off with the promo code STUDIO when you purchase an annual subscription. Go to rumble.com/premium and use the promo code STUDIO for $10 off your subscription. Like I said, if you have the means and believe in the cause, now's the time to join Rumble Premium. If you don't have the means, we are just so grateful and happy that you watch us on Rumble. All right, David Menzies, if you are all sorted out there, what did you think about what you saw? I think it's an absolute axe murdering for J.D. Vance.
Well, and I think the strongest thrust of the axe, Sheila, was all about immigration. Kamala Harris, who before she became the presidential candidate for the Democrats, was known as the border czar. And now it's the border what?
She had never been to the border.
Yeah. And, when Walz says we've hired 15,000 more Border Patrol agents. Yeah, but the problem is, if they're not empowered, Sheila, that's just so much wallpaper as far as I'm concerned. And secondly, as the saying goes, the proof is in the pudding. How many millions of people, the estimates are as high as 21 million, have come across the U.S.-Mexican southern border in the last 4 years. So you can say we've hired this many new agents and whatnot, but I just say look at the reality on the ground, and it tells a gravely different picture. It's a disaster. And who are some of these illegals coming in? Is it people from destitute lands fleeing hardship and pursuing the American dream? Or are there gangsters? Are there terrorists? Are there drug traffickers? Are there sex trade traffickers? I mean, that's the reality. And for Tim to say we've hired 15,000 more Border Patrol agents, yeah, please.
Yeah, to deal with what? How many millions of people crossing the border?
Yeah.
There were some really, I think we've got to go back. Maybe we'll talk about it after. But for me, the climate change answer, perfect. And Tim Walz not knowing when he was in Hong Kong. That's beautiful. He was stunned. He looks like one of those curmudgeons from the Muppets that sit in the balcony the whole time. Anyways, I'll zip it. Let's watch.
Claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartels. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is just your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, and here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that work. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said actually about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Is okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools, we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was the NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where My shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is talking about cities and where it's at. The number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues, making sure folks have health care and all that. But I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns. And there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. Let's turn now to the top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. First, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the vice president is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens if you lower energy prices? As Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal immigration, is, think about it. If a truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer?
Can I have it?
Where, yeah. Governor, we will get to you in a moment, but Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for a national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in.
Well, of course, that's not true. And again, you have the facts. I guess we
prices.
agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That, look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's, again, blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask, though, on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor, your time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. It's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. Think about healthcare. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice and will also drive down costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill, but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think it's an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done. But when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and healthcare costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better healthcare policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened, and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight, is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher, and he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then
so
what
you
happens
think the
is
individual mandate's a good idea?
you shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying health care once you get past 70. So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret?
Can I address that?
I apologize. We're out of time. We have a number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Let's talk about families in America. There is a child care crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you've said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start. The family works better. We stay in their employers. We get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue. Those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some cases, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company, but the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of childcare model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with childcare. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide childcare in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote childcare, because look, it is unacceptable. And, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on childcare as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as childcare is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families, cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, childcare options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the childcare shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the childcare shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide childcare options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, if those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with childcare and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy is growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that, to me, is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he did. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day. Some with the American flag, several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, "We're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties." The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret?
Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that. We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance. I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement. But this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this, I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News vice presidential debate continues.
Sheila, thoughts? Can't hear you.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if my mic was on before because I was yelling at my kids. But it's pretty rich, as J.D. Vance puts it, for Tim Walz to say, and they want to lock up their political opponents. How many times have you people tried to lock up President Trump? Like, he is that which he's accusing the other side of. It sounds a lot like Trudeau, actually, to listen to him talk. saying, what do you think? Donald Trump, if he wins, he's not going to turn power back over. We're pretty sure he did. Like he literally did once. That's why Kamala is the VP. It's just odd. It's like they want us to forget the last 4 years.
Well, you're right, Sheila. And by the way, it all comes down to this. Who was president of the United States of America on January the 6th?
What do you mean?
Well, it was Donald Trump. So
right.
How can he have an insurrection against himself? That's what I'm saying.
Well, even if there was a peaceful transition of power, there was no revolution, despite what the Democrats would have you believe. Biden is somewhere convalescing on a beach while half of Appalachia is underwater, catching flies with his mouth open, like snoring away, while photographers take pictures, while his country's in crisis and a hot war is kicking off in the Middle East. He's in charge. Yeah. Kamala Harris, I don't know who's in charge. Is it Kamala? Is it Biden? God knows who's in charge. Maybe it's one of the Soros kids. But somebody's in charge of that country because Donald Trump peacefully turned over power. End of story. There he is, convalescing on the beach.
No, you're right. It's very rich to talk about imprisoning political opponents, as Tim Walz said. But would that include, I don't know, weaponizing the DOJ and the FBI to go after a former and perhaps future president? Exactly. Would that be having some stitch up a trial in New York with a judge that was in an abhorrent conflict of interest in terms of being a Democrat supporter? And how about this? It's one thing to imprison political opponents. What about this, Sheila? What about trying to assassinate them, as has happened on 2 occasions in just the last few months? Pardon?
They found that guy with explosives in his car near a. I know.
I'm already losing track.
There's so many. It's like Trudeau ethics violations. They got to give them Roman numerals from here on out. Yeah. And then Tim Walz says, well, if Facebook's censoring people, I don't run Facebook. And then Facebook testified just a couple of weeks ago that they were bowing to the pressure of the Biden-Harris administration. So actually you do run Facebook. You guys do run Facebook.
That was a whopper. And by the way, if electoral fraud isn't so bad, why was it just mere hours ago, several hours ago, Sheila, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed SB 1174, which bars all local governments in California from, quote, requiring a person to prevent identification for the purpose of voting or submitting a ballot, end quote. Why would you want to do that?
Exactly. Why would you want to do that unless you wanted to make sure that people who weren't legally required to vote, legally able to vote for your guy?
That is scary.
Yeah.
And I wonder how many other states might ramrod something like this through in advance of the next election in November, less than 40 days away. I've got a whole whack of notes that I've made.
I know.
Me
too. I've got like several pages of notes here, but it goes all the way back to the very beginning. All that debate training, and I'm guilty of this because I make funny faces on camera when I'm trying to listen to things, and I know I do it, and I don't realize I'm doing it till the end, but I haven't just undergone a debate intensive where the world is looking at you to see if you're a good dude. And Tim Walz is painfully unaware of his Muppet face. Like, it's just like, when he stops, it's like.
I was thinking about that, Sheila, and I was thinking, what character from pop culture does Tampon Tim remind me of?
Balcony Muppet. He's a balcony Muppet.
That's a good one. But I go back a little further, and to me, and maybe one of our super producers can call up an image, it's a cartoon character.
Freedom really
I'll leave it
something.
for the end.
Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage. And then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you. Senator Vance, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that too has gotten harder with Kamala because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35 days until Election Day. Please get out and vote. And for all of us here at CBS News, thank you and good night.
Or as some Democrats would say, go out and vote quickly, vote frequently. So, but I digress.
Vote often. Very different closing statements there. Like, I love that J.D. Vance points out the last 3.5 years of living hell that you've lived through. Don't vote for more. Don't vote for more if you think it was unbearable, because you're just going to get more. I thought that was the point I wish Trump had hammered home in his debate performance. Just further to your point about who Tim Walz reminds you of, for me, he's a balcony Muppet. A bit of his face looks like balcony Muppet. But then I was like, who in pop culture, in sort of the things that I like to read up on and stuff like that, he's reminding me of somebody, and I had to stop and think. And it's Marshall Applewhite. Do you know who Marshall Applewhite is?
I do not.
He was the leader of the Heaven's Gate cult, the ones that all dressed the same and wore those Nikes that they had to discontinue and covered themselves in like purple blankets and waited for the comet to come. They were also self-castrated eunuchs, I should tell you. But anyways, just when he's talking and he's like doing this with his hands and staring fiercely at the camera, it reminded me of that speech from Marshall Applewhite where he's like, basically, like it's time to get off planet Earth. That he looks like that for sure.
Well, that's far more harsh than what I came up with, which was Deputy Dog.
Yes, I had Deputy Dog too on my list.
A very obscure cartoon character. But, by the way, let's reverse engineer this from the closing remarks. J.D. Vance rightly said, unfortunately, energy wasn't a topic up for discussion. Gee, I wonder why that was, Sheila. Is it because maybe under the Trump administration, America, for the first time in 70 years, was energy self-sufficient? In fact, even exporting energy. And, riddle me this.
And to continue on that thought, and under the Biden-Harris administration, they emptied out the strategic reserve to push down the price at the pumps to protect the Biden and Harris administration from the economic fallout from skyrocketing gas prices.
Yeah, don't tell me that wasn't politically driven.
100%. It's not meant for that. It's meant for times of war.
And you know what? Isn't the timing impeccable? Just when the world is heating up, let's sell off the strategic reserve. Here's the thing when it comes to energy. It's funny. I remember seeing a recent poll. It was going through all the issues that are of concern rather to Americans in this election, Sheila. I believe number one was strengthening the economy. Of course, that's a no-brainer. Number two, defending against terrorism, 100%. Number 18 was dealing with climate change. Why was that the number two subject raised by the Nora and Margaret show when, according to one poll at least, it's not even the top 15? The other thing I want to talk about,
it's the least actually least important of the five top of mind issues for Canadians. It's the least important for us. It's like number 5, and it's especially low for young people because people are catching on that this sort of stuff, climate change policies, cost you money.
Yeah.
And so if you can't, it's a first world problem. If you can't put milk in the fridge, you don't care about anything else.
And also, do you think maybe there's a disconnect between the political and media elites and the common person just trying to
Do you mean
get
that I
out
don't care about the same things as Nora? Is that what you're trying to get at?
Also, I want to say this, and I know J.D. Vance, I'm going to bet when we see the mainstream media coverage of this in the hours ahead, it'll be appalling. That's about as, daring a prediction as saying, I think there's salt water in the Pacific Ocean. But you know what? They're probably going to go after him for that quote he made. The rules were you weren't going to fact check, end quote. Now, Sheila, maybe you're a fan of moderators fact checking, and maybe you're not.
Wrong.
But that was the rule in this debate, unlike the last one. The candidates would fact check each other. But right out of the gate, they start fact checking J.D. Vance. And when he gives them blowback on breaking their own rules, they silence his microphone.
Yeah.
That's shameful.
Saw it. Yeah. And I like that he kept talking even though they silenced his mic so that people could tell that they cut his mic. Because otherwise you weren't going to know that they cut his mic. So he kept talking and talking louder to show them exactly what was happening. And I like that.
Yeah. So talk about electoral interference. It's not Russia. It's CBS News in this case. Sheila, and, comparing apples with apples, why wouldn't they fact check Tim Walz when right out of the gate, when they were talking about Israel and having the right to defend itself, when he said that going back to October 7th, the amount of the death toll in Israel that day was 1,400. I don't mean to be a nitpicker, but he's exaggerating the death toll by about 200 people there. So if they are kind of quasi semi-officially fact checking, why didn't he get a fact check for that? He was
inflating death rates all over the place, though. What did he say about January 6th? And I was like, did I hear that right? And I know I did. He said that several police officers or many police officers were attacked. And then I wrote it down. He said several later died. several police officers died because of January 6th. Several?
So
what are their names?
Yeah, where's this fact check? And Sheila, if we were running a newspaper, I think I know what my headline is for tomorrow morning's edition. It's a pull quote from Tim, in which he says, quote, "I've become friends with school shooters." End quote.
School shooters.
School shooters, really?
The Trump campaign is already all over that. They're like, Trump, Vance, we're not friends with school shooters. That's their new slogan.
I'm assuming, I'm going to be charitable, give him the benefit of the doubt. He meant, I hope, the surviving family members of the school shooting victims.
Trump, Vance, not friends with school shooters.
Oh, wow.
No, he's not. He didn't say that because he said, I've talked to I'm friends with families of school shooting victims.
Yeah.
I'm friends with school shooters.
Yep. As he says, I've become friends with school shooters. That's what I took down. There it is. I've been friends with school.
Is he insane?
Well, I guess
that man is a blessing.
I guess technically, if he said I've been, that's the past tense. So he's no longer friends with the school shooters. Thank God. Is he insane?
Is he insane? Going back to the very beginning, I love how the debate started off. And instantly Tim Vance is like, oh, dang, I did that wrong. When they go into like what they're doing there and blah, blah, blah. And he just goes right into attacking Trump and the Trump Vance campaign. And then it was Vance's turn. And he takes time to introduce himself, says, many of you don't know me, why I'm running. I want to thank I want to thank my opponent. I want to thank CBS. Like, it was like, he forgot to be an actual human being. Oh, what is happening in my house? I think we're getting some kind of emergency.
Please don't say it's a home invasion, Sheila Gunn Reid.
I don't know. Anyway, David, carry on. I'm getting an emergency alert to my home.
Oh, well, let's all pray for Sheila that there's no shenanigans going on with some reprobate wherever Sheila lives. I still don't know after knowing her all these years. I think another thing is when Tim Walz kept talking about the terrible state of affairs in terms of the border crisis, in terms of how hostile the world is right now, don't we all have to ask ourselves, who has been in the White House these past 4 years? It hasn't been Donald Trump. It's been Biden and Harris. So it was almost, I got the impression that he's arguing that it's time for change by bringing in Kamala Harris. But Kamala Harris being the vice president these past 4 years, that's endorsing the same old. And I don't know if Sheila is back with us, but
I'm back.
Have I got that right? Am I missing some nuance here, Sheila?
No, you're 100% right. I should give everybody an update. There's no emergency in my house except for teenagers cooking. Set off the smoke detector, and it's still going off because who showed those kids how to use the damn air fryer? This is all my fault. Anyways, ignore me. David, go on.
No, and I'm glad we touched upon the censorship issue, which isn't nearly as bad, I think, as what we have in Canada with all the various censorship bills. But the big tech, walking in lockstep, Sheila, with the Biden-Harris administration. And I think you made the point, it was perversely ironic of Tim saying he doesn't run Facebook. Well, you kind of do, according to Zuckerberg.
Right.
The guy who does run Facebook. Right.
Yeah. And I like that on the issue of climate change, Vance didn't get drug into the scientific debate of the science being settled and blah, 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 and then ultimately being called a climate change denier. He did not take the bait. What he said is, let's concede this for a second. If you agree that carbon emissions are destroying the face of the earth, why wouldn't you want to repatriate manufacturing to a cleaner jurisdiction? Why wouldn't you want to repatriate oil and gas production to a cleaner jurisdiction? I would have went even a little bit further. I would have said, unleash the miracle of fracking, because under the Trump administration, greenhouse gas emissions plummeted because he was not only drill baby drill, but he was frack baby frack, and that drives down emissions. And I'm glad he made that argument. Look, if you care about these things, and let me be on the record, I'm not somebody who does, by the way, but if you care about these things, then it is better to have a booming American economy as opposed to a booming, dirty Chinese economy.
And on that point, Sheila, I think that might have been a misstep for J.D. Vance, that he didn't pressure Walz into trying to give us irrefutably what Kamala Harris's position is on fracking. Because until just a couple of months ago, she was totally against fracking. And now all of a sudden, with an election and with a swing state of Pennsylvania, where fracking is a very big deal, well, you know what? Fracking might be an alternative, a viable alternative, that is, to helping with our energy deficit. I don't believe she's telling the truth. I think she's still anti-fracking. I think she's
she is.
Yeah, she's just saying something to buy Pennsylvanian votes. And again, Walz, he had a quote, this thing, meaning the hurricane, faster and stronger than we've ever seen.
Not true. There's no rise. There's no rise in the instances of extreme weather or weather weirding, as they say, because first we had global warming and then that didn't happen. So then they say it's climate change. But that's not really happening either. So then they say it's like weather weirding, but that's not happening either. Things get more expensive to fix once they get ruined because things are more expensive. Thanks, government out of control spending driving up inflation. But that's just how it is. Things might be a little bit more expensive, according to the Insurance Bureau, to repair the damage from weather, but that also comes with more people living on the coastline and thus more homes being destroyed. But there's no rise whatsoever in violent weather.
But, Sheila, the point I was going to make is that let's just say in Tim's lifetime, this has been the fastest and strongest hurricane he's ever seen. Okay. And let's say in the annals of recorded weather, which I understand only go back not even 300 years of accurate records, this is the fastest and strongest hurricane. When we're talking about a geological timeline, right? When we're talking about the environment and the climate, the idea that this was the strongest hurricane in a decade, even a century, when in geology, a millennium, 1,000 years is a blink of an eyelash in a planet that's been around for billions of years. So I'm saying, you're telling me there was no hurricane this strong and this fast, say, 160 million years ago, during the Jurassic era, where dinosaurs were ruling the earth, in a timeline when there was 5 mass extinctions on the planet before Homo sapiens ever came to rule the roost. That is the fallacy in this argument.
Of course it is. That's why geophysicists and geoscientists don't actually care about this stuff. But here's the thing. If this was the worst natural disaster to happen in a very long time, if ever, if you ask Tim Walz, the worst hurricane ever, according to Tim Walz, I'll start taking it seriously when Biden and Harris start taking it seriously. But Biden's, got his, his ass in the water and his toes in the sand. And Harris is taking phone calls from the plane that aren't even where her headset isn't even plugged in. Nobody's taking this stuff. Look at this. That's not plugged into the phone. And she's writing on what's on there. Nothing. Those are blank pieces of paper. They didn't even pretend to scribble. So this is what she's doing to deal with the hurricane. And Biden is I don't know, in the middle of some Alan Jackson country song right now. Like he's not taking it seriously. So I'm not going to take it seriously either, except I do in the fact that people's lives are being destroyed. But this is not a weather cataclysm unlike things we've never seen before.
Sheila, I'm absolutely staggered. Is that actually, like, I mean, I want to give you props for having such an eagle eye, because I never would have looked at that Kamala Harris photo op and connected the dots, or disconnect them as the case may be, and go, well, if she's got earphones on it and the cord is going down below the table, but her cell phone is on the table.
Yeah, from what I
what's
understand,
it plugged into?
What's it plugged into? Who's she talking to? So from what I understand, and this is full credit to, I think it was Matt Walsh today, maybe.
Okay.
He did a big drill down on this picture. And the reason he drilled down on this picture is because it's staged nonsense, obviously. This could have been taken at any point. But do you remember when President Bush flew over Katrina? And he was attacked for that, flying over Katrina, because it was like he was flying over the carnage, but didn't even actually care. But at least he was surveying the carnage. I don't know what she's looking at. She's pretending to talk on the phone, and they have to have wired headsets, from what I understand, because the Bluetooth can be hacked, but it's not plugged into anything, and she's scribbling on a piece of paper with nothing. And so the question is, why isn't she getting the same criticism for being disconnected from the carnage below that Trump got? And like, what did you want Trump to do? Rappel down into the hurricane disaster and start lifting people off the roof? I mean, what else could he do? But where's the same criticism here?
Well, Sheila, I think at the end of the day, whether you are a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, or really you don't even give a rodent's rectum, there are people that have lived, on our continent that have never gone to the ballot box and actually openly say that. And it breaks my heart and shocks me at the same time. But as always, it all comes down to, I think, were you better off 4 years ago than you are today? And really, objectively, unless you're maybe, I don't know, a shareholder in a pharmaceutical stock that was
Planned
very
Parenthood
popular during COVID-19, I don't think the answer across the board is yes, Sheila. I really don't. Let's put politics aside. When you fill up your gas tank, look what you're paying. When I was at the grocery store just yesterday. I had a little basket. And this is why, if I was ever going to become a contestant on The Price is Right, I would be the biggest loser in that game show's history, because I have no idea anymore. And I'm going by weight, Sheila. I'm going, it's about $50. $128.33.
David Menzies, the same thing has happened to me. My kids and I used to, and at some points here, there's like 7 people here between, boyfriends and my son coming to raid the fridge and his better half, and my in-laws live with me. And so anyways, there's a lot of people here all the time, but I am the keeper of the groceries. And it used to be like a weird thing that I was able to do, and it would freak people out. I could guess my groceries, and I'm telling you, hundreds of dollars worth of groceries, like a good Costco trip. I could guess it within $2 to $5 on like a $600 grocery bill.
Wow.
I have no idea anymore.
Yeah.
I have no idea anymore. I'll be like, well, I don't know, $200. It's $300 by the time I get to the car. Like I have no idea anymore. That's how what I'm saying is my skill set has not even been able to adjust to the rate of inflation increasing.
Yeah.
Because I can't catch up. We should probably wrap up, because it is, my good gracious, 11:08 Eastern time. And I have to go give my kids trouble for trying to burn down the house while I was on a live stream. Like, they don't.
Now that would be a viral video.
Can you imagine how angry I would be? Like, just imagine. I'm already a little annoyed. This stream had a bit the goblins for me. Anyway, we we have a quick message from our sponsor, and then we'll wrap up the show. Somebody sends David a really nice message. I'll read that too.
Okay.
Yes. So as you know, and this is why we're here again, the 2024 U.S. election is upon our doorstep, and us Canadians, your hat America, we're also very concerned. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are knocking on your door. They're pushing for higher taxes for Americans and even higher taxes on unrealized gains. Could you imagine that, paying taxes on something you've never took profits on? What would that do to the economy? Will they come for your retirement savings? Don't give them ideas. Will they come for your house? Who knows? But don't wait to find out. Learn how you could protect and diversify everything you've worked for with the top-rated precious metals company, Goldco. Goldco has over 6,000 five-star reviews, a bunch of awards, and has helped thousands of Americans purchase over $2.5 billion with a B dollars in gold and silver. Visit rebelnews4gold.com, and this is just for our American friends. rebelnews4gold.com to get your free 2025 gold and silver kit, plus up to a 10% instant match on bonus silver for qualified accounts. Learn how precious metals like gold and silver could help you. Visit rebelnews4gold.com. Again, that's rebelnews4gold.com. And that is just for our American friends. Although, boy, us Canadians could use a reprieve from the tax man too. Okay.
And Sheila, by the way, before you read that chat, I just, that really shivers me timbers. Taxes on unrealized gains. So as they say in football, can we get a ruling on the field here? What if my assets depreciate? These are unrealized losses. So I haven't sold any of my investments. I haven't sold my house, which for whatever reason went down in value. Do I get a tax credit then if we're going to get taxed on unrealized gains?
I don't know, but don't give these people ideas. They won't give you a tax credit. Look at Justin Trudeau, this capital gains nonsense. Why don't you just chase all the job creators to the United States so that the Biden and Harris administration can get their unrealized gains while they're at it?
Unbelievable.
Yes. We've got one nice message here from Kimmy, who says, David rocks the hat.
Oh, well, thank you, Timmy. There is an origin.
Timmy.
Oh, Kimmy. Well, that's even
It was
better.
a lady. It's better. Yes.
Me being a heterosexual male, I know that's not cool these days, but it's just a matter of fact. Well, Kimmy, thank you so much. If we ever meet up, and by the way, I don't know where you are in proximity to Calgary, but Rebel News Live, we're coming there on Saturday. There are still some tickets left. So Kimmy, if you can get there, I'll meet you in person and I'll take you aside and I'll tell you the origin story of the hat. It's not quite as dramatic as, say, Peter Parker being bit by a radioactive spider.
I'll give you the Coles Notes version. He scared a mainstream media journalist into traffic because his hair was a little too wild during COVID. He looked like just an electrocuted Bob Ross, I think is the best way to put it. And he startled her into traffic. And so since then, he's been covering his hair. And then one time you were working outside and you got a sunburn. And so it was just a match made in heaven. It's practical and for safety purposes.
Oh, I remember that was on July 1st on Parliament Hill on Dominion Day. And we were out on the hill for hours and hours. And if they still had the circus sideshow, I could have been Lobster Boy. Okay?
And you have red hair. Like, let's be clear. You are not someone who should be outside for extended periods of time.
There you go. Well, now you know the abbreviated story. So, but nevertheless, thank you so much, Kimmy. Well, Sheila, that was a blast. Thank you so much for surviving a potentially towering inferno. I don't know how many stories your house is, but I hope everything's okay. And I hope your kids made a nice, delicious dinner. And folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the debate. Hope you enjoyed our analysis. Wow. What is it? 35 days to go, I think.
35.
Unbelievable. Time flies. A little longer for wannabe regime change in our dominion, of course, but it'll be here before you know it. And maybe even sooner than we think. If the Bloc Quebecois are serious about you, either prop us up on these. No, you don't think so. Yeah. I just so want to see Jugmeat screwed out of his pension. Yeah, I guess I got a bit of a mean streak, but he deserves it.
Oh, it couldn't happen to a nicer guy for sure, but they're not gonna.
In any event, folks, thank you so much. Sheila, I think, are you hosting the live stream on Friday?
You betcha.
Well, there you go. I cannot co-host with her. I will be en route to Calgary for the aforementioned Calgary Rebel News live event. So tune in on Friday to see Sheila. I'll be back on the live stream next Monday. In the meantime, as always, stay safe and stay sane.